Welcome everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. It's our final webinar on PPR's energy efficiency webinar series, thanks to funding from the Washington State Department of Ecology. Today's webinar is entitled An Examination of the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program, or PACE. Our speaker today is Jessica Bailey with the Connecticut Clean Energy Finance and Investment Authority. And I'm going to turn this right over to Jessica.
Great. Thank you so much, Angela, and thanks to everyone for joining the webinar. I am speaking to you from Connecticut at the Clean Energy Finance and Investment Authority, which is an organization I'll say a few words about. I came on board at CEFIA, as it's known, in September after having spent the previous 8 years at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund in New York, where I was the program officer for sustainable development and did a lot of the grant making around climate change and clean energy. And I left that position to take on this position because I was so excited about the opportunity for PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, in Connecticut to help expand and scale clean energy on buildings across the state. We are hoping what we are building in Connecticut is a model for the country and is replicable. And we are pulling from lessons that we've learned from other states that have moved ahead of us. So in this presentation, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we are trying to do here in Connecticut, and happy to answer questions about that and other PACE programs. So Angela, next slide. So this will be our kind of quick agenda here. First, who is CEFIA? What is CPACE? What's our role in designing the CPACE program for the state? Why is it, we think, a very advantageous policy and program for building owners? And how does our process work? I'll do my best to walk through these pretty quickly and leave as much time for Q&A as we can. So next slide, Angela. CEFIA is an organization that was created by legislation in 2011. It's known as Connecticut's Green Bank. And it was built because the governor and the state legislature have a commitment to move Connecticut away from a clean energy system that is funded primarily by grants and rebates and towards a clean energy system that attracts private capital. So our job at CEFIA is to bring in that capital from the private markets to deploy clean energy across the state. Next slide, please. The program that I was brought in to run is CPACE. Next slide. CPACE is a financial product that is essentially designed to de-risk investment in clean energy on buildings for private markets. It is an innovative financing structure that allows, in our market, commercial, industrial, and multifamily building owners to get 100% upfront financing to undertake clean energy upgrades on their buildings, and to repay that loan, it technically isn't a loan, but to repay that investment as a line item on their property tax bill. The reason that we are able to attract low-cost, long-term capital into this market is because the PACE lien is treated as a tax lien, which is another way of saying that it sits in a senior position ahead of a mortgage. This de-risks the investment for the private markets because in the unlikely case of a default, the PACE lien, like any other tax lien, is paid first. The way Connecticut has done this and the way states across the country have done it is by designating clean energy essentially as a public benefit and allowing us to use this public benefit assessment system to finance it. The same way we finance sewers or sidewalks or schoolhouses or firehouses. We can now use essentially the tools of the state and the security of the state to make investment in clean energy for private markets less risky. Next slide, please. The barriers that PACE is intending to overcome are many of the barriers that are faced by commercial real estate owners who are looking to do upgrades on their building. Next slide, please. And the ones that you see here are from a survey that Johnson Controls did a couple of years back. It looked at the reasons commercial property owners don't move. The big one, as you can see here, is the lack of capital. Nobody wants to go out of pocket to do energy improvements. And so this lack of upfront capital has really been what's holding building owners back from doing the energy upgrades that we know would be a good move for their buildings. There are other barriers that this addresses as well, and I'll get to those in just a minute. Next slide. Connecticut was not the first state to pass this policy, and indeed I like to say we got the 28th mover advantage. There are states, as you can see highlighted here in this map from PACE Now, which is a nonprofit organization helping states move forward with PACE programs. You can see the states that have passed legislation, and you can see the states that are actively designing programs. Each of these programs looks a little bit different. They are having varying levels of success and ramping up, and at varying levels of progress. There are a few that are moving quite quickly. I like to think that Connecticut is one of them. But Connecticut had the benefit of looking around the country and figuring out what these other states had done and what was working well in their policies and in their programs, and to take the best of what they'd built and put it into our policy. Next slide, please. And you can see the nuances of our policy here, the Connecticut Special Session 12-2, that was the actual bill that our policy passed within. That was passed in June. And apart from designating energy upgrades as essentially a public benefit and allowing us to use this tax lien structure to finance energy upgrades, it did a couple of other things that I wanted to point out because it is distinguishing Connecticut's program from some of the others that have gotten up and running. The first thing that we did is we limited it to commercial, industrial, and multifamily property owners. For the time being, at least, Connecticut is not allowing PACE financing to go to residential homeowners. There is a reason that we've done this at this time. It has to do with a designation by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that they do not like the senior lien that the PACE assessments take. And so for the time being, we have decided to not allow residential homeowners to access this and to move forward with a program that allows commercial, industrial, and multifamily property owners. The second thing we did in our statute was to require the consent of the existing mortgage lender. You heard me say a few minutes ago that one of the reasons we're able to bring capital into this program is because of the security that the PACE lien gives to the investor. It sits as a tax lien on a property. The person who gets most nervous about a senior lien, of course, is the one who's holding the junior lien. And so we spent quite a bit of time in Connecticut talking with, thinking through, and working with the bankers in our state to figure out how we could get them to be less nervous about essentially a lien that will sit ahead of them in a capital stack. And the way we were able to do this at the end of the day was by requiring the consent of the existing mortgage lender in our policy. So in order for us to approve financing on a building, we need written consent from the bank that is holding the, if there is a mortgage, from the bank holding the mortgage on the property. We think we've got good reason to believe that the banks will be willing to grant this consent based on the way we've designed our program. I'll say a few words about that in a minute. The third piece of our policy was that we require that the savings investment ratio be greater than 1, which is to say that the energy savings from the upgrades a building owner wants to undertake must pay for the assessment on the property tax bill. Their energy bill needs to go down by more than their property tax bill with this assessment on it goes up. This means for a building owner, the net operating income is improved. It means for an investor that this is an investable project. The other requirement is that the upgrades are permanently affixed. This is to say we will not be able to finance any upgrades that a building owner wants to do on their building that they may take with them when they leave that building, if they move out of it. So any appliances, et cetera, things like that. Fourth, we passed a statewide program in Connecticut. We're a small state here. It is a statewide program into which municipalities opt in. They are not required to join this program. They are invited to join this program, and there is a single set of standards and underwriting criteria for the entire state for this program, and the municipalities who are interested in offering this financing opportunity to their building owners opt in. And I'll say a couple more words about that in a moment. And finally, the empowered CEFIA in our policy that was passed in June to be the statewide administrator for this program. So CEFIA is the organization that is setting the guidelines, that is implementing the policy, that is attracting the capital and designing the program. Next slide, please. So what is our role in designing PACE? It is a sizable role. We're doing, yeah, great, thanks. We're doing 3 things at once, quite frankly. We're designing the program, we're administering it, and we're bringing in the capital for our building owners. The first piece of it, designing our program here, we published our guidelines in November of 2012. They're currently up on our website. The guidelines answer just about any question you might have about this policy. We are bringing municipalities on board. As I said, we need municipalities to opt into this, and we're spending quite a bit of time going around the state getting municipalities to understand why this is a great economic development tool for them. And then finally, we're launching our website. It should be launched actually by the end of this month. I think it'll be up maybe even by next week. The link that you see here is not live yet, but give us another week and it will be live. The current website at the end of the slideshow, for anyone who's interested, you can see info today. Next slide, please. This is a map of Connecticut showing the municipalities that we're bringing on board. We have been targeted to attract the interest of the municipalities with large concentrations of commercial and industrial properties. Next slide, please. We have 11 towns on board now. This is out of date by just about a day or two. We got Stamford on board late last week, so they should be added to this list of municipalities that are on board. The coming soon list continues to grow, and that's an exciting list for us. Each new town that comes on board expands the market that we can access, expands the number of building owners that can use this capital. Next slide, please. This is just a screenshot of what our application will look like. We want to make it as easy as we can for building owners who want to do improvements to their buildings. So we're trying to make this as user-friendly as possible. Next slide. Administering the program, there is quite a bit to do to run the program, to implement the program. A piece of it has to do with our technical underwriting. A piece of it has to do with marketing and outreach. And a piece of it has to do, as I mentioned before, working with existing mortgage lenders. Next slide, please. One of the early things we discovered was that we needed experts to help us on the technical side. We wanted the best in the business advising Connecticut on how we would do what we call our technical underwriting to make sure that we are meeting our statutory requirement that the savings, the energy savings, are going to be greater than the investment. And so we ran a competitive process, and we brought in a Connecticut-based team to help us do that technical underwriting and serve as our third-party administrators. This is a firm that's including Bonacor Partners, Celtic Energy, and Sustainable Real Estate Solutions. They are really the A-team. When we have a deal come in, they look at the energy conservation measures. They run it through a process that is tried and true, that pulls upon the best from around the country, and they make sure that the energy savings that the building owner or its contractor is saying are going to accrue to the building are actually based on the best data we have available to us. Next slide, please. The list of what's eligible in terms of our upgrades is quite long. It's really anything that saves energy from a baseline energy data point. And this can include lighting, HVAC upgrades, renewable energy systems, fuel switching, water conservation, truly anything that is going to reduce the energy consumption of the building, as long as it is permanently affixed to the property. Next slide, please. This just gives you a quick list of what's not eligible. The big things that are not eligible are really things that a building owner could take with them when they leave, or things that do not meet that savings criteria, that have energy savings that will be greater than the repayment of the PACE assessment. Next slide, please. This is a kind of a quick look at our program review paths. We've got a full assessment and a fast-track approach. Next slide, please. I won't get into this in detail here. On the marketing side, some of what we've been doing is really looking at our state and figuring out where the opportunities are in Connecticut. Where are the buildings that are using the most energy, that are creating the most pollution, that are the best opportunities for PACE financing? And not surprisingly, for those who know Connecticut, they're mostly hovering around I-95 and I-91. These are the highways that most of the buildings and most of the larger towns are around. These are the towns we're targeting. Next slide, please. And then finally, attracting private capital. As I said at the beginning of this, our role really at CEFIA is to be a green bank, to bring capital into our state, to create financial structures that give confidence to the capital markets to move money to our building owners. And so we've run a process to qualify capital providers. We are able to offer credit enhancements, and we're also able to serve, and we are serving as the legal conduit. Next slide, please. We've brought on 8 qualified capital providers. This was through a RFQ process, a request for qualifications process that we ran a few months ago. It's ongoing, and capital providers are able to apply for that. This was really a way to get capital providers educated about the program that we're designing here and give building owners access to some of the financial partners that we brought on. We think of it in some ways as our lending tree model. When deals come into us, if they come into us without any capital source that they prefer to work with, they're welcome to work with whomever they want. But if they want our help connecting with capital, we can put their deal out to this lending tree, if you will, and we think that it is a way to inject some competition into the market. Next slide, please. So this is going to be a little bit hard to walk through since I'm not driving the slideshow here. So I'm just going to, I'm not going to have you walk through each of these slides, but just to have a look at the capital flow process. The property owner would engage with a contractor who would undertake the energy conservation measures, or define the energy conservation measures. If the property owner decides they want to move forward, they would apply to CEFIA and our third-party administrator for approval. If we approve it, it would be based upon the mortgage holder's consent. The contractor would move forward with the energy conservation measures. CEFIA, my organization, would request that the town place a caveat on the land records. The project would become complete. The lien would be placed on the land records, and the capital provider would move with that security, with that lien security. The capital provider would move money to the property owner to pay the contractor. And then upon completion, the property owner would begin paying the town tax collector the repayment of this energy assessment. And the town tax collector would remit that money over to CEFIA to pay the capital provider. It's an incredibly complicated way to present this. I apologize for walking through it quickly, but I just wanted folks on the phone to see what it looked like. So Angela, you can skip through the next slides pretty quickly because I'm not going to try and walk through it all in sequence. And I will make sure you guys have these slides if folks want to dig in a little bit more. Next slide, please. So the CEFIA advantage, why go through all the rigmarole? Why pass the policy? Why have 28 states done this? Why is Connecticut working so hard to make it work? Next slide, please. Well, really it's about addressing the barriers that keep our customers, the building owners, from undertaking upgrades on their buildings that will reduce pollution, reduce their energy costs, and make their buildings better. The PACE advantage really addresses some of the key barriers, as I showed at the beginning on that chart. If a building owner thinks that they might sell the building, the tax obligation on PACE is fixed to the property. They are not required to pay it off before they move. So this solves the problem that a building owner who might not be thinking that they'll be in the building for the 20 years that PACE financing can be on a building. If they've got a lack of funding, if they don't want to go out of pocket for the upfront cost to do the upgrades, if they'd rather use their own capital to do core business improvements like buying more trucks or buying the building next door or buying more inventory, this gives them upfront financing that they can use for energy upgrades. We can spread the financing over 20 years. This gives a lot of opportunity for a building owner to do deep energy upgrades, to go after what is not necessarily the low-hanging fruit, but to do the types of energy upgrades that are really going to cut the consumption of energy in the building. Third, if a building can't take on any more debt because it's an assessment, a property tax assessment, it qualifies as an operating expense rather than a capital expense. If there's not enough payback, the building owner might worry that there's insufficient return on investment here. Based on our statute, we require a positive cash flow in year one. If there's a split incentive issue, which is to say if the building owner does not pay for their utility bills, but the tenant pays for them, and the building owner may be reluctant to undertake any upgrades that they're not going to see the benefit from, PACE solves this. This is considered a property tax assessment. And so a building owner can pass it through to its tenants, the same tenants who are getting the benefit of having the reduced utility bills. And then finally, the uncertain savings and the technical expertise. There is always a concern among building owners, and quite frankly everyone, that the energy savings may not accrue. And so the process and the program that we set up in Connecticut really does some pretty sophisticated analysis on the energy conservation measures that a building owner might do. And so it sort of reviews the math, if you will, of the contractor or the auditor or the energy company that's come in and told a building owner what they should do. We help, we certainly don't provide a guarantee. There are no guarantees, but we provide another level of due diligence to make sure that the energy savings will really accrue. Next slide, please. The other stakeholders that we see our program serving is capital providers. Of course, as I mentioned, this is a very secure investment product for them. For mortgage lenders, this really helps the building on which they're holding the mortgage become more attractive, both from a financial perspective, but also from a leasing perspective. Buildings that have low energy costs and have upgraded energy systems are more marketable. And for municipalities with whom we're spending a lot of time, this is a tremendous economic development tool for them. It allows them to meet some of the conservation goals, the energy efficiency goals, the climate change goals that they've set for their towns. It allows the businesses in their town to reduce their energy costs and keeps them competitive. And of course, it reduces pollution. Next slide. I'm not going to walk through this. This just gives you a sense of kind of a sample building, but I'm not going to get into that. Next slide, please. This is a good graphic that just shows sort of the deeper savings and the greater value that PACE improvements can bring to a building. With PACE improvements, you have improved tenant conditions, higher occupancy, which leads to higher rents. Of course, that leads to a higher net operating income for a building, and that building increases in value and efficiency. Next slide, please. And finally, the process, just to walk you through very quickly our process here. Next slide. We're trying to keep it as easy as we can. Everyone on this call who spends any time thinking about energy, buildings, or finance knows that it is nowhere near as easy as 4 easy steps, but we're doing our best. And so we're trying to work with a market that is still emerging here. And so for a building owner, it's about choosing your upgrades. It's about applying for funding. It's about installing that project and getting funding and making payment. We think that the easier we can make this for a building owner to access, to understand, and to undertake, the more successful we'll be in generating demand here in Connecticut. Next slide. And that is just our website there. That last line is the website where you can find current information. That website is on its way out. So don't send me any comments about how it could be changed, because it will no longer be our website in about 2 weeks. But there is all the information that you might be interested in on that website. My office number is up here. I'm happy to answer any questions over the phone. And I really appreciate the chance to talk about what we're doing in Connecticut. As I mentioned, we are really trying to pull from the best of what we're seeing around the country. And there is a very active conversation among the PACE administrators, my counterparts in other states, about best practices that are emerging, about lessons that are being learned, and about ways that we can really scale this market in 2013. And I'm feeling quite confident that this financial tool will be one that helps states meet their energy efficiency goals, meet their clean energy goals, and help address climate change in the United States. So with that, Angela, I will turn it over to you for questions. And again, thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. And just so all our attendees know, the slides will be posted, and a recording of the webinar, a link to the recording of the webinar will be posted on p2.org. The slides will go on today. The recording will go on later this week, and that link for the recording will go to a YouTube page. So we have a couple questions coming in. Please type your questions in the question box. Since we don't have a huge number of attendees, also we'll try the hand-raising feature, and I can unmute you, and you can ask the question that way as well. So our first question is, what is the time period over which the energy bill savings need to exceed tax bill increase?
So this will depend on the types of energy upgrades that the building owner wants to do. We can extend the financing over 20 years, which allows us to have a building owner become cash flow positive really on day one. We are not interested in extending the financing for longer than the expected life of the measure, so we won't necessarily go out to 20 years. But really, with the financing in place and with the timeline of that financing, a building owner should expect to be cash flow positive from the outset.
And the next question, are utilities allowed to participate as lenders?
It's a very good question, and one that has not come up. We're working very closely with utilities on their incentive programs because we are, of course, trying to wrap in any available incentives to bring down the cost of financing necessary to do the upgrades. We've not had any conversations about whether or not they would use their own capital to be lenders into this. I don't see why they couldn't, but it just hasn't come up quite yet.
I'm not seeing any other questions coming up. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jessica, and presenting for us. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. Bye.